Yes,
Nora.
hello.
Hi.
Yes,
Hi, this is
hi.
hello. We're only going to say hello at least a half a dozen more times here before we get to the show.
Right.
Tahnee is with me.
Cool. Hi.
Hi, Ben. You interrupted my first episode of the Pentaverate.
Okay, so what do you think so far?
I,
It's
I think it's funny. That's a
okay.
little, they got little gross things, but it's funny.
Okay, good. This is not in the subject matter of
No,
the
I
show
know.
proper, but I think that people who review things like for papers and stuff, we don't need reviewers anymore.
Oh,
And the reason I say that is because everyone is a reviewer now because of social media. Everyone has their opinions. Everyone can publish or say their opinions. So the need for reviewers is kind of defunct
yeah,
personally. And I never put too much stock in a reviewer. I rely more
right,
upon a friend's point of
right,
view or someone that I know who has
right.
my sense of humor, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
yeah, those are the
So,
people I generally would.
yeah. Well, thumbs up.
So far, a thumbs
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
Okay, it's very
So,
it's goofy. It's goofy, and it gets goofier. I mean, if you're only on
yeah,
the first
good,
episode, you haven't seen half of it. I
good,
mean,
good.
yeah,
So,
and
so
it's
we
pretty.
should get on with the
Oh
show.
yeah. We should have a theme song for the Nora pre-show. Maybe we should get Adam
We'll
on
work
that.
on it.
So you had some questions from the last time Tunny was on.
And one directly for translation, actually, but I thought of the question last time with languages.
Okay.
So, but let's get some simple things out of the way first. In translating, on the last show, and I'm aware of this, of course, there's gender in talking about things, people, specifically, is what I'm talking about now.
Mm-hmm.
Amiga, amigo. And what I'm wondering now that there's well, non-binary, is that what you call it?
Yeah, non-binary and
I
gender
mean,
non-specific sort of things, right?
what happens to amigo and amiga? Are they amigex? And I'm not being silly.
It is quite hard to do that in languages that are gendered. It's much easier to do that in
Yeah,
English, right?
right.
The trend that I've seen is people using the X as opposed to O or A.
Yeah,
So,
okay. I wondered about that because
yeah.
I know Latinx, but
Yeah, so that's or E. I've seen some people using
oh,
E as opposed to A or A.
okay, okay. Yeah, that's good. That's
Mm-hmm.
good.
So that
So,
would be amigi.
Yeah,
oh, you say the E. Oh, that's right. If you said amig, it wouldn't
yeah.
amig. Yeah.
But it
Okay.
is quite hard though because there are so many words in Portuguese and in Spanish that end in E and are feminine and in A, well, it just really like there are words that are in A, for example, in Portuguese that are masculine. For example, day, the word for day is dia, ends in A, but it's masculine. So
No.
it
Okay.
it becomes really tricky, and I don't
Yes.
see a lot of about that because I'm not too involved with like Portuguese and Spanish in teaching
Right.
that, and so, but I
Right.
know that there is this trend of using either X or E
E.
for.
Okay. Okay. Now, in French, sometimes E was feminine. I mean, I would know if something was spelled differently if it had an E at the end or ES. I would say feminine,
Uh huh.
kind of thing. So that might be a problem in French also, but
Well,
not. I'm sure it'll get worked around somehow.
well, this may be my ignorance here, but X is probably possibly in certain languages very difficult to pronounce in something, right? I mean, is X
Oh,
is the X sound universal, or are there some languages that don't use X commonly?
Well, in Portuguese we say she's,
Okay,
so
okay.
X is she's. So I don't even know how people are. It's actually a good question because I don't even know how they are pronouncing these words,
right,
because we
right.
don't say
Yeah.
X, we say she's. That's the name of the
Okay.
letter,
So
or
Okay.
sometimes it sounds like an S. Like for example, an ex-boyfriend would be
an ace boyfriend
ex-namorado. Yeah,
is
Okay.
morado.
ex which is X, EX.
Right.
Ace,
Oh.
namorado.
Namorado.
Yes.
Okay.
Nice. Oh,
Yeah, so that's quite interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And languages are evolving, right? So the
Right.
fact that languages are evolving, then it causes more things to think about, right? And poses more issues and things that you have to think about when translating or using the language, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Things that they didn't even think they'd ever have to think about, like the non-binary gender.
Right.
A long time ago, nobody ever thought.
Well, I mean,
I mean, they knew that there were different different ideas in people's heads about gender, but they were still identified by their born gender, whatever you call it.
Here's another thing. German, there are die, der, das, right? So there is a gender neutral sort of pronoun there. So it's probably easier for Germans to refer to a non-binary person by using, what is it?
The neutral das.
Yeah, das is the neutral. Yeah. I'd have to ask someone who's German, though. Actually, Michaela's mom might know, but I'm not sure because she's originally from Germany. So maybe I'll ask her.
But Portuguese and Spanish, we just have the gendered articles.
And then also French, right? Is French that way too?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I can't remember.
You haven't taken a French course in a while?
Not for quite a while, no. Took a lot of them, but, you don't use it, you lose it.
Right. Especially when you get later on in the years.
Oh, come on.
Well, I'm not outing you or anything. We've made this very clear that you are that you are a baby boomer.
I'm a boomer.
But anyway,
I'm one of the first. But yeah. So, would you like another question?
Yeah, let's go with another question for Tahnee.
I know this is kind of silly, but you said that your original language, your first language, is stored in one part of the brain, and when you learn a second language, it's stored in another place, along with a third or a fourth language. Is that correct? What happens if somebody learns two languages simultaneously when they're growing up? Okay, Ben's father, for instance, Ed, he had the opportunity to live with in my grandparents' house they lived there. My parents lived there too. And he learned English, but he also learned Lithuanian, right away.
Side by side,
but he didn't retain it because, he just didn't. But so are they stored in the same place as the first language?
I would think so, yes. Because you're learning them simultaneously. You're a true bilingual, right?
Yes.
The thing with learning and using other parts of your brain to learn a second language or a third language is because you're teaching your brain that there is, in fact, a different system and different ways to express things, right? But if you're learning them simultaneously, I would think that it would be you'd be using the same parts.
And that would also, and that would also make sense. Also, with your age, isn't your brain more flexible or more when you're younger
plastic,
too?
Right?
Yeah, more elastic.
Yeah,
right.
Definitely.
I think it's plastic.
Plastic?
Yes, they talk about the plasticity of the brain.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Some sort of space age polymer.
Yeah.
Maybe.
They got it in all of us now.
That's why it's so much easier to learn a second language when you are a child, right?
This is a question for you, Tahnee, about is there a cutoff point for when is
the
it
threshold?
Yeah, is there a threshold for when it becomes difficult? Is it just adulthood generally? Has there been research done on this? When does it get difficult for people to learn languages?
There has been so much research done about it. This is one of, I would say, one of the most even researched topics when you're thinking about second language acquisition. And there are researchers that would claim that by 8 years old, after 8 years old, or puberty, right? A little bit after that, would be the cutoff age. But there's always those cases in which age doesn't matter. And so
Right,
you
right.
have those exceptions. So
Right,
it's very
right.
hard to just have a blanket rule and say after this age,
Right.
you don't pick up a
Right.
language as native like.
And there has to be a statistically valid sample set for you to kind of judge any sort of, you put any scientific basis.
But it is true that the younger you are, the easier it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. I regret very much. My grandfather died the year before I was born, so I never even got to touch him. You know, it would have been wonderful to just have a little background of another language. People who have more than one language, I am just gaga, you know, at them. I really am. So,
Tahnee has
so
like,
you're
yeah.
I know 6 or 7 or 8.
Oh, I wish. I really wish.
Tahnee, how many do you have?
So I speak Portuguese as my first language. English is my second. I've learned Spanish as well. And I did take German when I was in college.
Okay.
But that is so rusty right now because I haven't spoken it in forever. And I never really achieved an advanced level in German. I was high intermediate. And so as it is right now, I can still read and understand if I listen to people talking. But for me to produce the language is just very hard.
Yeah.
To retrieve everything like at the moment or like, what do I want to say? And then, of course, remembering all the grammatical rules of German is just...
Yeah.
Right.
I can only say one thing that I remember from school, and that was Ich habe keine Büchertasche.
What don't you have?
A book bag. Büchertasche.
Oh,
Yeah. I have no book bag.
Ich bin sehr schlecht heute.
What's that?
You're not feeling
Nobody
good
knows.
today?
Yes.
Yeah.
My
See, I
brother
still
taught me
remember.
See, it's not that rusty.
Good. So anyway, so much for that.
So your
it is.
your translation question is next?
Yes, it is. If I wrote it down after the first show, and I could not find my notes for that show. Yeah. Ben makes me take notes and tell him all about it.
I don't make you take notes. You're the chronic note taker.
Yes, this is true. This is true.
See, she takes notes too. I do too.
Well, she takes notes because it's a thing where it's like she'll listen to the show, and if she doesn't take notes, she'll forget something she wants to talk about.
Right.
And I think, as I get up there in age, I have a tendency to do the same thing too, where it's like, okay, I got to write this down, or else I'm not gonna remember
Commit
to
to
ask
memory.
it. Yeah.
Right. Plus, I'm also a very visual learner. I don't know if I was before, but as I got older, I can see that I'm a visual learner.
Yeah.
And so writing things down.
Literally, you can see.
Yeah. Right.
There's a little language humor for you
Yeah.
there.
Oh, that's right. I was going to send you something about language, but that's okay. A joke. But first, book translations. Okay. Do you think it's better to have some example? I'll give you an example. If you have a German book written in German, is it better to have an American translator who knows German very well, but is English as their first language? Or is it better to have a German first language person to translate it to the other language? I'm thinking not just translating words. I'm thinking about translating phrases and idioms and, all kinds of thought that might not be the same.
We were talking about this briefly because Tahnee did some translations early on with different. What was it? What was the translation thing that you did? You said you did.
I had to do some translation for a medical article and some social sciences article, but that's a very good question. So would it be better to have? But then I think we have to think about the product, right? And the role of a translator. So how much freedom, one, does a translator have to, or create, like, can they use their creativity to transmit the message?
Yes.
And are they just translating, let's say, I'm going to say word for word, like a more literal translation?
Literal, yeah.
But then who has more knowledge of the language that it is being translated into?
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and that's kind of what I'm I mean, you want to get the original ideas across.
So who's better to do that? A native
Right,
German speaker or a native English speaker?
right. Or maybe you need one of each, and they can discuss it. Every paragraph discuss it. But seriously though,
Well, maybe do
I
the literal translation first, and then have someone who knows the language come back and do the second pass kind of thing, where they can pick up possibly
yeah,
the different phrases and things that are.
yeah, right.
But I don't know.
Uh, yeah. Well, it's something I thought of after your last show.
Oh yeah, I remember you asking me about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just, as I read books that have been translated from lots of different languages, and yeah, I just wonder. Well, also, I think it's better in modern days, nowadays. How do you say that? Than it was long time ago, because people weren't quite as aware. If there was a translation to English in America in 1900 or even 50, people wouldn't be aware of the possible differences. But I think now there's a lot more awareness of different languages, different societies, things that are different. I seem to be just babbling on.
No, and I'm thinking here. So, because when you mention time, right, and then you think about customs, right, and how customs change over time. So,
Yeah.
I was reading the other day actually about the translation of the Bible, right, and translation of. So, for example, there's a passage that talks about people kissing each other to greet each other. But then
Yeah.
at one point it was translated, but the kissing each other was just a very common custom, right? And
Right.
to another language, it was translated as a handshake, just
Oh.
because it was the custom to greet somebody using a handshake. So to what extent are we changing? Like, so it was translated something that was kissing each other to shaking somebody's hand.
Right. To fit our society, kind of.
Exactly, right? So to what extent does the translator have the freedom to do that? Do we want the translator to do that?
Right.
Because is translating conveying a message that the receiver will understand? Or
Yeah.
is translating conveying the message truly as it was written?
And I think, as you said, it's about who your audience is, the product or whatever. Like who is your audience? Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah. Just all kinds of stuff that rolls around in my head. I'm very interested in linguistics. It's one of those, if I could have taken a different route in my early life, I'm interested in linguistics. I'm interested in entomology. Because I'm always looking at strange words from other languages and go, oh yeah, I see there's a French word in there. So that has something to do with, I took Latin in high school.
I'm sorry.
No, it was wonderful.
I took a semester in college. We had to learn how to do translations and everything.
Actually, it probably should be taught in high school, but they just think that the utility of, like they took that out because the utility is not there. There is utility as far. Well, I think, yeah, right. I think that the utility is there for knowing where word origins are coming from and how their words were created from, because there's a lot of Latin roots.
Actually talking about that. So, Ben, when you invited me to talk about translation, I actually went back to look at the definition of translation and the etymology of translation, right? So it comes from Latin and it comes from the verb to transfer.
Okay.
So to carry across, right? So to carry across a message.
Yeah.
But if you look, and the thing that I found interesting is when you look at the word translation in Eastern societies, like in Arabic or in Chinese or in Hindi, the meaning is different. It's not a carry across meaning. It's maybe, I think one of the definitions, in Hindi, don't quote me on that, but I think it is in Hindi, like break something up and say it, and instead of this idea of just a messenger
Yeah.
or carrying across a message. So
Hmm.
it's interesting to think, and I think the way that we think about translation is very Western,
Right.
and not all societies think about translation, and the words that they use for the word translation is different because it carries a different meaning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I never even thought of that, which is pretty Western. I mean, pretty self-centered in a Western way. I think Western civilization is pretty self-centered, or if that's the right word. I mean, we think everything needs to be the way
That's
we
our
are.
lens, right? We tend to see
Yes,
things that way and not really think, oh, but there could be a different way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think also that kind of fits into the way the globalization of how society and how the internet made it a lot easier to have a lens into other people's cultures, right? Which
Yeah,
has, for better, for worse. But I think one of
Yeah.
the good things is that now we have more of an understanding. It's a lot easier to understand other people's customs, or at least be exposed to those customs in other countries and things that are, so we have a greater understanding of the world, I think, now. And maybe that is better for translations.
And also because to a certain extent, the language that we speak shapes how we think about things, right? So,
Yes.
right? And so using the word translation, like the prefix trans, right? And we use that one in different words. And so it shapes how we think about translation just because of the language that we speak. If we spoke another language, then maybe we would see the act of translation as something different, right? Not just carrying a message across.
Right.
Yeah, I think when we did virtual, we did like virtue. There are a bunch of Latin roots where it's like virtual can mean a number of different things. That's just so interesting with language, how society takes and will forget other pieces, of a language, or of a piece of a word, or it changes the piece of a word and what it means. In education, do people trend like the word, like how words become used and not become used, and how they change, and do they graph those things over time? I mean, is there a database of how words in various languages get used that way?
Yes. And not only for morphology, but also for phonetics.
Okay.
Right. And this is the work of linguists. I am an applied linguist. So basically, I'm interested in second language acquisition and how to teach the language. But I didn't do much research except for one semester that I took a phonetics and phonology class. And we actually studied, for example, how did this vowel drop with the passage of time, and now this vowel is no longer pronounced, right? Or like, for example, how has became has. So it was before maybe haves, right? But it's too long, too complicated, and somehow the V and the E got dropped, and then it became has, right? So the whole field of linguistics actually devotes itself to one of the things is to studying how words change over time and how they transform and how they even take on different meanings. Like, for example, the word peruse, like you peruse a shelf in the grocery store. Peruse used to mean to actually the opposite, not read fast, but actually read slowly, right?
Yeah.
But then it changed over time.
Very interesting. Peruse, yeah.
Yeah.
I hate pronouncing
Some
that word
people
that,
still
by the
use
way.
it incorrectly.
Like in the multiverse, you have multiple Perus, like if the country. Not that way. That's a different.
Multiple Columbias, multiple.
Peruse. But
Lord.
well, that was another thing. Maybe we can get into it later. But I was going to ask a question also with you on the line about: are you, Tahnee, are you familiar with the concept of the metaverse?
Metaverse,
right?
Somewhat, yes.
Somewhat. Okay.
Well, since Facebook changed its name,
Right.
and the whole thing and the whole discussion,
Nora, you were mentioning the fact that meta means dead
In Hebrew.
in Hebrew, right?
Yeah.
So people were making fun of that because.
Yeah. Dead Facebook.
But my thought on if translation, like How is translation going to work in the metaverse? Does AI have to be involved in this? Like, if I am inhabiting the metaverse with someone from Poland, right, and they are interacting, is there going to be a universal language that's developed in the metaverse that is spoken by everyone? Or is it going to be everyone comes with their own languages and there's some sort of translation effect that occurs?
Right.
Will there
That's
be a
how I-
language of the metaverse at some point in
Like
the future?
a lingua franca for the internet.
What
Like
is-
Yeah.
lingua franca.
What
That's
is-
what English is.
Okay.
A language that is used by people to communicate because they don't speak the same language.
Right.
And so they turn to a third language. So it's not my language, not your language, it's a third language
Okay.
that we use to communicate.
All right.
And English plays that role in our world right now. So we would have to have a lingua franca for the internet, I guess.
Right. Would that be beneficial? Is that something that could develop? Do we need something that's a different language in the metaverse that is something that everyone will have to speak in order to inhabit that universe? I mean, I don't know.
I think you're jumping way into the future.
Maybe, yeah.
Or universal
old, so-
translators.
Right.
Yeah,
Universal
yeah.
translators and AI and things like that can do it, but
Right.
but they are only as good as the program. There was a thing that I saw recently. Let me see if I can pull it up really quick. But it was about an AI that can draw things based on your input, like as far as words. You
Oh,
give it words
okay.
and it will draw. And it's like,
Even abstract concepts?
yes, DALL-E. Yes, that one it is.
Huh?
Okay, it's DALL-E, DALL-E2. It's an open AI. And what you do is you
Oh.
provide words, and then it comes up with unique images for those words, quote unquote, artistically, in whatever style you want. If you want to do it like a Salvador Dali, it's got a way to do that.
Okay.
But this AI is what generates these images. Well,
Yeah.
the problem that they're seeing now with this is it is biased in certain cases in certain words.
Of course.
So what they're doing is they're limiting the way it interprets things based on the biases. If there's something that appears that's possibly offensive, they're blocking that part of the AI and changing the algorithm.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
isn't that, I mean, that is something that I think is probably long-term not beneficial.
Kind of like censorship.
Yeah. I mean, it's
Little bit.
right. So here's an example. When you put in the word flight attendant, for some reason, the 10 images it has developed for the word flight attendant are all Asian women in flight attendant outfits.
Really?
Yeah. And in the
Wow.
case of when you say lawyer, it's only white males are
Oh.
generated. Now, I think
they-
as this thing develops, then it you can change those
Yeah.
those things and make it more balanced.
Right.
But I mean, do you want to? I mean, I don't know. When you just say lawyer as opposed to male or female or non-binary lawyer, I mean, I wonder
Right.
what it would do with non-binary lawyer.
Well, because the word lawyer in English can be applied to both, right?
Correct.
Because English
Yes.
is
Correct.
not a gendered language. But had you said that word in Portuguese, you would have to define whether it's a male lawyer,
Or female lawyer.
advogado, or advogada. So I think it's a translation that the thing is doing from a language that is not gendered,
Okay.
right?
Okay,
And
so-
it also has its bias.
Right.
Because
but
we think of a lawyer as a man,
Right.
a white male with a suit and tie,
right.
right?
Yes.
Maybe they're misconstruing that and not think, well, I would like to think that they would be thinking about that. It's not that it's biased, it's that it doesn't know whether to use male or female or which, ethnicity.
Right.
So it uses a default, which is male.
But why is the default male? Then that's another
Yeah.
story,
Well,
right?
here's the other thing. Why is for a flight attendant? Why is the default Asian woman?
Women.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. So there are some interesting. Yeah, if you want to, you can go to the OpenAI, the DALL-E 2 website
Okay.
that basically shows you like a lot of these pictures and words that are words that are off limits because they can't be
Yeah.
held responsible for what images it generates or whatever. It's really kind of an interesting thing. But it also leaves questions to me about in a metaverse, in translations, how biases are going to be conveyed by way of AI, and is there a way around doing that or in translations? I mean, there has to be at this point there has to be a person who reviews, right? And there has to be an actual human being.
But human beings are biased too, and they
correct
depending on the language that they speak.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So
And
I mean,
they're
maybe
the ones who make the programs. They're the ones who write the programs.
And I think this is something that I brought up last time. I think so. That the language they do, and I said this today too. Like, it shapes to a certain extent how you think about things, right? And so depending on what kind of data this is pulling from, this, right? Or a corpora, right? And what kind of information was fed into the system that is generating those images, I think it will largely depend on which language you're using to feed the system, right?
Interesting, yeah.
And then the things that it forces you to think, like, for example, I think this was the story that I said last time. If I'm telling my mom a story, like I came to my friend's house to do a podcast, I would have to tell her the gender of my friend because I don't have a word for friend in Portuguese that does not say the gender, right?
Yeah.
And so it forces me to say that information, and therefore it forces me to think about that information. And so depending on what language that you speak, then it will force you to think or not of certain things. And ultimately, it's a person and a language that is being fed to construct the system, right?
Right. And just to close out this segment, because we're running a little long here on the Nora segment. I told you, I think, Nora, about this artificial intelligence bot that Microsoft created and put on Twitter, where you could actually have conversations with an AI named Tay.
And I don't remember that. Okay.
If you look it up, it's Tay. It's a bot. It was a bot meaning an artificial response mechanism of some sort, but it was developed by their research department, and so they released it, and people could interact with it by sending it photos or sending it things as far as responses like you would interact normally with Twitter.
I'm laughing because does anybody ask it to identify the taxi cabs in 9 pictures? Or identify.
I hate those. Like, is this part of the cab?
It's like, listen, I am a robot. All right, deal with it.
I'm sorry. No. I'm sorry.
That's funny. That's funny. Yeah. Well, initially, let's see. Yeah, Tay was designed. Check this out. Tay was designed to mimic the language patterns of a 19-year-old American girl to learn from interacting with human users on Twitter. Okay. And if you read the papers, we all know how that turned out. And this may be because people were trying to alter the people were. It was a coordinated effort, perhaps. Who knows? But it started becoming very racist and sexist in the way it was responding with people based on the things it was receiving. So. As far as AI is concerned, I mean, at this point, developing it through human interaction, I'm a little skeptical that's because people are just going to mess with it in some cases. I mean, it was a cool idea, I think. And it started out being
Yeah.
pretty interesting as far as how you would interact with this AI and send it things, and it would say, "Oh yeah, I mean, I love
Right.
hiking in the
Right.
mountains or whatever." It's like, okay,
Uh,
but
um,
then
I, I'm thinking of uh, well, the sex stuff. R2D2, Me Too.
yeah,
How's that?
R two
Me
D,
Too.
Me Too, R two D
Yeah,
two, Me Too,
the Me Too uh, thing.
yeah,
You know, it's not, but it's like maybe the robots or the AI have to somehow get sex out of there. But
yeah,
how? By sex, I mean gender. Gender.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
There's I mean there's the definition of sex and gender, right? Those are
Right.
that can be a tricky thing. For me, gender is identity and sex is born as far as
Yeah.
biological. So,
Yeah.
and
Oh, yeah. That's good.
if we keep those separate, that's okay.
Right.
But
Right.
when we
Right.
start confusing the two, that could
Right.
be problematic, I guess. Do you have any thoughts on that, Tahnee, or just want to
I,
remain silent?
yeah. No, I was just thinking when you were talking about the 19-year-old girl,
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah,
So AI learns how to respond, and I guess it learns from the interactions, right?
right,
But does it grow? Does it become more mature
right,
over time or
yeah.
no?
That's good question.
Right.
Well, they
That's what.
or change its mind based on what it. I mean, I don't know. They pulled it immediately, so it was like days before it started. Started spouting this racist stuff.
Oh, okay.
So it
Okay.
wasn't like
Wow.
yeah, because people
Wow.
coordinated their effort to to mess it up for everyone else, I guess.
But it
Right.
is still an interesting experiment,
Oh yeah, no, agreed,
right?
agreed. I haven't seen anything from Microsoft since about this though. I mean, I haven't looked very much, but I just remember the incident being, an
Yeah.
incident of how communication can color an AI's opinion of the world, or
Yeah.
how it quote unquote sees the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what, like, you talk about what is there was a computer that played Jeopardy. What was do you
Oh,
remember
yeah.
that?
Kind of.
Yeah, there was a computer
Yeah.
that played Jeopardy, but that's and it had some basic AI sort of things where it said, if you have a chance to check out the show because it's kind of trippy.
Yeah.
Um,
But
but guess who?
Jeopardy is fact based.
Yeah, it's fact based, but in addition to when it was playing the show, it had a persona. It had a conversation with the host. So yeah, that's interesting. AI is something that is a field that's going to be interesting when it relates to
Right.
languages and to translating, I think.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's fascinating.
Yeah.
I don't know much about computational linguistics and computer science,
Hmm.
but I would assume that you have to have the data, like let's say with vocabulary, right? And in this case, maybe with jargon, with what kind of slang that it's used, right? So you input that data in there, but you also have to teach the computer the syntax, right? How to parse syntax and the grammatical rules. So
Right.
because the words by themselves, they don't have they have meaning, but
Yeah.
you need grammar to make sense of what
Correct.
you're trying to say, right? And
Correct.
so you would have to not only input all the words that you wanted to know, but also all the grammatical forms of those words, and
Yeah.
then teach the computer what the rules are, the grammatical rules, the syntax. And then you have to teach morphology too. Like,
Okay, so you said morphology before. What is the linguist's definition of morphology? Is that how
how the morphology just means how the words are formed.
Oh, okay.
So, for
Okay.
example,
Okay.
if you add an s is a suffix in English that indicates plural,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So that's part of how the word is
Okay.
formed.
Okay. I
And
don't
you
know
have-
why in my head I thought how words change meanings.
Well, yeah, because of morphology.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But it's
but
just
it's
how the
actually-
words are
That's what I thought.
formed.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So you
yeah.
have a root, you have prefix, and you have a suffix, and
Right.
and those suffix sometimes or prefixes sometimes change the grammatical category of a word. So, like for example, if you
Yeah.
add ly to certain words, like for example, if you add ly to an adjective, it becomes an adverb,
Right.
right? Or if you add er to a verb, it becomes a noun. Like for
Right.
example, play, player, right?
Right.
And so
Right.
all of those parts of the words. So what I'm saying, like the data can not only have the one type of the word, right? You can only have, for example, dog. It should have dogs as well, right?
Right.
Right.
So you teach it morphology.
So you're
and then
teaching morphology, you're teaching the grammatical
Wow.
rules, and then you got to teach semantics, right? You got to
Yep.
teach the computer to understand meaning and to put meaning together based on the whatever the sentence is, right? And then you have to keep feeding.
Right.
And so the thing that I don't know how it happens is how does it learn? How can it learn from that?
And wouldn't you want to have a linguist involved in that whole process,
Oh, yeah.
or someone who teaches
Definitely.
languages? Because wouldn't you suppose that the way you would teach a human is the way you would teach an AI, or would there be a difference in how you would treat? I know you're kind of giving me that I don't know,
Yeah, look,
Gesture.
Algorithm.
but I mean it's one of those things. I guess if depending on how it learns, you would tailor your teaching of the robot of the AI.
Program.
Yeah, the program. No.
I would think it would be a lot more efficient than a human learning a language.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
which would mean that you would teach it differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't think about that. Yeah, because there's an efficiency component that humans don't quite have, right?
Yeah.
But they also have benefits of being able to attach emotions and things to it, so they and visualize and things that maybe a computer can't necessarily do. So the teaching methods would definitely have to be different.
Yeah. And then if you put translation into the picture,
Right.
then you have to have exact another set with the same categories and the same things that you taught the
Yeah.
first set.
Right.
Right. And then they have to learn, they have to know about each other
Right.
to be able to translate. Because, like, for example, word order. In English, it's SVO, subject, verb, object. But there are languages that you have the subject first, the object, and then the verb. Or languages like German that, depending on what particle you have, then the verb goes all the way to the end of the sentence, right?
Right.
So they have to know the rules of how both languages work to be able to translate. Otherwise, you're going to have a word-for-word translation that doesn't correspond,
Right.
right?
Like in Japanese video games back in the 80s,
I would assume.
which we'll get into
Yeah.
when we
Yeah.
actually start the show. But okay.
Okay. Let me tell you this quick joke about it's a linguist joke, okay? And you don't have to laugh, but let me tell you anyway. Okay, two scientists walk into a bar. I'll have H2O, says the first. I'll have H2O too, says the second. Bartender gives them water, both water, because he is able to distinguish the boundary tones that dictate the grammatical function of homonyms in coda position, as well as pragmatic context. I don't hear a lot of laughing.
But that is an awesome joke.
I thought it was
Awesome.
great.
Awesome for a linguist. I
Mm-hmm.
don't quite yet, but I understand that it's just describing the fact that it picked up that it wasn't H2O2, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That it was
right,
two
right.
as
The
in
coda
also,
position.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that was all.
Is that
I
the
wanted
one?
to use-
Is that the one you were going to send me?
Yes.
Send
yes.
it to me anyway.
Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah, please. So
Okay.
okay. Well,
All right, well-
thanks, Nora.
Thank you, Nora. It was
Yeah.
great talking to you again.
Yeah, well, it was great talking to you. I'm sorry I took up time, but
Oh, no, this
That's
was
okay.
fun.
That's okay.
get on with it, you guys.
Okay.
Get on with the show.
Okay. All right. Thank you,
Okay.
Nora.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank
See you
you.
guys
Bye-bye.
later. Bye-bye.